Redshift here, doing my part to shift perceptions out of the pink and into the red. Okay, so I no longer have the grooming versus courting video that I made a while back. So since Old Man Flappy Nuts asked me to repost that video or do a new one, I looked for the script and I looked for the video and I must have deleted them. So I don't have them anymore, although I'm sure they're on the mirror. So I thought I would do a new video on that topic. I don't remember most of what I say in most of my videos because I have a terrible memory. So I don't know how much overlap there is between this video and that last video. I don't remember having changed my mind on this topic though. So I assume that all these things that are my view on this topic are things that I said before in the last video, and if I didn't say it, it's not like I changed my mind. It's just like maybe I forgot to mention it on the last video or something. So this is probably just basically a rehash of that previous video on the difference between grooming and courting. So this is mainly for Old Man Flappy Nuts and or any new viewers who have never seen any of my old videos and would be new to this topic or whatever, because they never saw the original. Interestingly, he asked me to put up that video in a comment on the very same day that I was thinking of that topic, and I had not gone on YouTube and seen his comment. So considering I don't really think about this topic very often, it's kind of interesting coincidence there. Although I guess that's what coincidences are. You know, like you don't notice all the billions of non-coincidences that, you know, don't happen all the time. You only notice the ones that do. So I'm not necessarily saying it means anything, but you know, when something like that happens, it kind of makes me wonder, I wonder if karma or telepathy really are real, you know? But anyway, the script goes like this. Regarding the difference between grooming and courting. Um, Regarding the difference between grooming and courting. Grooming is manipulative, it's deceitful, it's pretending to be nice to this person, liking them, giving them gifts, getting them to like you, etc., all for the deceitful, selfish, manipulative, exploitative, destructive purpose of getting it so that you can either get this person to start having sex with you voluntarily, or so that you can molest them or rape them and have them not report you to anyone. Even though it wasn't really consensual, you pressured them into it, but because they got all these gifts from you and they thought you were their friend, they feel bad about telling on you, so they don't report what you did to them. So grooming is exploitative, it's dishonest, it's manipulative, it's for the selfish purpose of getting sexual gratification and getting away with it even though it's illegal. Grooming seems to be similar to courting an underage girl, but it's totally different because courting does not involve sex. So the whole getting to know the person process in courting is not for any ulterior motive. In grooming, the whole process is for the ulterior motive of getting sex from this underage person, raping or molesting this person and getting away with it, and not committing to the victim at all, and never having any intention of committing to the victim at all, right? And then the intention is to, you know, get this person into your confidence or whatever, get them to trust you, molest them, and then move on, right? And then do it to somebody else all over again, a new victim. You know, in grooming, it's not a case of things not working out, like in a dating relationship. It's even worse than dating because even if the sex is, you know, sort of consensual with this underage person that you've been grooming, it's not like you ever had any intention of committing to them, right? So it's not like you dated someone with the thought that, well, maybe it'll work out, maybe we'll be together forever. No, in grooming, that's not even ever the thought. You know, the thought is just like, well, I'll get sex from this person and enjoy my time with them for a little while and then I'll move on. Right? So, you know, in dating, you're being irresponsible and you don't know if it'll work out and you're having sex. But grooming is worse because you know that you're not going to stay with this underage person who you're trying to force or coerce or pressure or wheedle sex from. You're trying to pressure or coerce them into sex or wheedle sex from them, right? Even if it's not coercion per se. When you're grooming someone, you know you don't want to be with them permanently, so you're just looking to use them, very much the way a guy who pumps and dumps a girl does. But instead of seducing them, you're grooming them. It's different, you know, longer term, more subtle process than seduction. But it's still kind of a similar thing. The difference being that your victim is underage and the grooming seduction is a longer term process than the seduction of a girl to pump and dump. And it's not necessarily consensual when the abuser, the groomer, does have sex with the victim. But it's still quite similar to pumping and dumping someone. Not consensual pumping and dumping like a one night stand, but it being the case where a girl might think it might turn into more than a one night stand, and the guy does not do anything to convince her that it's just going to be a one night stand. He lets her think that it might be more than that, right? Like a consensual one night stand is different, right? But like Meaning like, they both know it's just going to be that one night. But when it's more the case of like, he knows it's just going to be one night, but she thinks, oh, maybe this could be the start of something, right? And then so she sleeps with him, but he bangs her knowing he'll never talk to her again. And then she doesn't find out until the next morning that there's no chance of a relationship happening because all he wanted was sex. If she had known it was just going to be a one night stand, she probably would not have slept with him. The bigger the age difference, the worse it is in like, grooming or whatever. If you're like 30 and you're grooming a 13-year-old, that's really bad. But if you're 25 years old and you seduce some, or like in one night stands, for example, even, right? Like, the ages differ between like grooming and like a one night stand, like a pump and dump type of thing. But like, even if you pump and dump a girl who's underage, it's less bad if she's older, right? Like if she's 17 and you're 21 and you pump and dump her, or she's 17 and you're 23, that's illegal. But still, even though it's illegal, it's like, she's 17, so it's not that bad. But like if you're 30 and you groom a 13-year-old and then you bang her, that's not good. That is really bad. You know what I mean? That's totally different than banging a 17-year-old, because 17 is almost legal. Not that law has anything to do with morality, but like, it's much older, it's much more mature. So 17 is totally different than 13. You know what I mean? But like, if you're 25 and you seduce some 20-year-old girl, she's 20, even if she's 18 or 19, that's radically different than 13. That's legal, but like, it's maybe not so good to pump and dump someone. It's not nice, but it's still better than pumping and dumping some 13 or 14-year-old. Especially considering you'd probably have to groom her, so it's more deceitful. Because 13 and 14-year-olds don't typically have one night stands. Although a lot of them, way more sluts these days than there were 20 years ago. So, there's even promiscuous 13-year-olds these days, which is crazy, but it does exist. You can say that a guy is taking advantage when the person is really young. They don't know any better. They're young, stupid, ignorant, naive. So you're taking advantage if you're grooming someone. You're doing that to an extent when you pump and dump someone, but not as much. So it's not as bad because the person is usually older than a grooming victim. But the difference between grooming and courting is like, if you start grooming a 14-year-old girl, maybe you're 21, maybe you're 35. The point is you're trying to get sex from an underage girl. That's what makes it grooming. Maybe you groom her for 6 months, maybe a year. She's still only 14 when you have sex with her. Or maybe she's 15, but that's still too young. 16 is nubile, but not, I don't think 16 is pump and dump age, especially if she's a virgin, that's fucked up. But like 16 is marriageable age. But if your intention is just to have sex with her and pump and dump her, whether you have sex with her once or 50 times before you dump her, if there's no thought on your part of commitment, if there's no commitment there, you're not trying to commit to her at all, you have no thought of commitment, then that's also a bad thing. Like, in fact, in the back of your head, you very consciously know that you're not going to commit to her. When you're grooming this 14-year-old girl, try to have sex with her when she's 15. That's a bad thing, And it doesn't matter whether you just bang her once and then dump her, or you bang her 50 times and then dump her. You never were intending on committing to her, so it's not courting. It's grooming. So grooming may seem like courting if the girl is the same age, like a guy's courting a 14-year-old for a couple of years until she's 16, or a guy's grooming a girl for a couple of years until she's 16. It may seem like the same thing, but it really is not. And I don't think guys who groom people usually groom them for such a long period of time, like 2 years. I mean, I've never studied it, but I think they groom the potential victim for probably just a few months or maybe a year. But I don't think they groom them for like 2 or 3 years until they get, unless I just don't think they groom them for that long. Right? They don't wait that long to get something out of this long process, right? I think grooming might only even be a few weeks, but maybe longer, like months. But whatever, I don't think it's 2 to 3 years. But courting is like that. You court them for as long as it takes before they're ready to marry you, or before they're legal to marry you, before you can legally marry them, and as long as their parents require for them to get to know you well enough and be confident that you're financially and emotionally ready to marry their daughter, and how long it takes for you to be sure that you know her well enough to where you can trust that she's who you think she is, so that she doesn't morph into somebody else after you marry her. You know what I mean? Like, it can take a long time, right? So So, there's various factors or whatever, but, courting can take a long time. You want to court them for as long as it takes before you're ready to marry them and they're ready to marry you and their parents are ready for her to marry you and stuff. You know, you don't have sex with them until you're both already married. You don't have sexual contact with her until it's your wedding night with her. You don't have to be ready to have kids right away, but you should be financially able to handle it if she does get pregnant unexpectedly. You theoretically could get married before you're financially ready to even have one kid, although that would be very unwise. But considering guys need to get their sexual needs met, and if he's very committed to his wife, he takes marriage extremely seriously, and he's planning on this marriage never ending in divorce come hell or high water, then it kind of makes sense to get married before you're ready to have kids. Although you'd have to be super careful about using birth control to make sure that she does not get pregnant before you're financially prepared to have a child with her. It takes guys a long time to get their career established these days, and promiscuity is incredibly destructive. So there's a certain rationale for guys marrying before they're ready to have kids, before they're financially ready to have kids, so that they can get their sexual needs met. Because sex drive is so strong, are you really going to postpone it until you're like 30 or something? Are you going to stay a virgin until you're 30 or 35 before you can afford to have a couple of kids? Especially since the way greater poverty these days because of ex-sexers being in the workforce and because of overtaxation and overregulation and all the rest of it, and inflation, which is another hidden tax. So it's like that's ridiculous. And the higher education requirement before you can get a middle class job these days, meaning more schooling, meaning you'd have to wait even longer to have kids. I mean, that's insane, right? That's totally insane. So you really can't expect guys to stay virgins until they're 30 or 35 before they're able to afford to marry and have 2 or 3 kids, right? So there is a certain rationale for guys getting married and having sex before they're financially ready to have kids. But there's not that does not make for a rationale for why you should be allowed to have sex outside of wedlock, because that destroys women's souls. It leads to promiscuity, therefore creates the incel problem, and therefore creates massive societal destructiveness, because eventually the incels are going to get super violent, etc. So there's definitely a rationale for guys marrying before they're ready to have a kid. And, considering birth control is so reliable these days, I think a copper IUD is probably like 99% effective, or maybe it's 99.5, I don't know. Maybe at the very least, it's like 98% effective. These things are really, really effective. So that means like, if it's 99% effective, that means for, every 100 guys who marry and start having sex with their wife before they're financially ready to have a child, they can't afford to have a child, there's only going to be one of those guys, one out of those 100 guys who marry like that before they're financially ready to have a child, only one of them is going to accidentally have a child. And so that means, it's really not going to be very societally destructive at all if guys start marrying and having sex way before they're financially ready to have a kid, if they have her have an IUD put in or something that's really reliable and doesn't rely on her memory, like taking the pill every day. So I wanted to say that. But like I was saying, there's a rationale for guys to marry before they're ready to have kids so they can get their sexual needs met. Then you can marry at 22 to 25 years old, and then maybe only start having kids after you've been married for 5 years, or maybe even longer. Education alone takes forever these days, and that's assuming, you have the intellect to, get that much education, like a PhD or something. If a guy wants a master's degree or PhD, it's going to take a lot longer before he can even start his career, especially in the case of him getting a PhD. Although, maybe it evens out kind of, because if you don't get a PhD or a master's or something, maybe you can start working earlier, and then you can perhaps, climb up the company ladder because you've been working for longer, whereas the guy who gets the PhD can get a really good paying job probably right after school. Right out of school, he can get a really good job that makes a lot of money. So, I don't know. You could look at it either way. It kind of evens out in a sense. So it makes a certain amount of sense to get married before you're financially prepared to have kids. God damn it, this fucking thing, it jumps sometimes. Fucking Christ. Yeah, so it makes a certain amount of sense to get married before you're financially prepared to have kids. Although you'd have to be extremely careful to not let her get pregnant until you can afford to have a kid with her. It'd be far better if we did some kind of assessment tests and found out what everyone is good at, and then had them specialize starting in maybe 5th or 6th grade. If everyone started training or getting educated for their future career when they were very young, then they could get a PhD or a master's in that field by the time they were 18, maybe even by the age of 16, and then that would mean he would start making good money at that much younger age, and as a result, he could get married at maybe 18 to 22 years old, instead of getting married when he's 30 to 35 after having gotten a law degree or a PhD and then having to spend a few years working to start making decent money or getting skilled at his job. Depending on what the job is, some jobs probably don't pay great money right out of the gate, even though you have a PhD, and other jobs do pay really well, even though you only have a even if probably you have less than a PhD. Some jobs, like a master's or whatever, pay really well if it's in the right field. So it kind of depends. But like I was saying, it's kind of crazy to get married at like 30 to 35 and stay a virgin until then. But you can't allow premarital sex and promiscuity either, because that's incredibly destructive to all of society. So, what are men supposed to do? Stay virgins until they're 30 to 35? No, that's unrealistic. But you can't have those guys dating and having sex either, because such promiscuous and serially monogamous behavior not only destroys women's souls and turns them into psychopaths, but also creates a massive shortage of women and turns a huge percentage of men into incels, and thus creates massive societal instability, which eventually leads to revolutionary war, as well as jaded, callous, psychopathic guys, massive gynocentrism because of the shortage of women, massive spreading of STDs, etc. You can't have guys having out-of-wedlock sex, but you can't make guys wait until their 30s to get married either. So we should be specializing our education at a young age so we can get a good job at a young age and then get married at a young age. It also means healthier children due to the women having children at a younger age as well, as compared to today where women have kids at the age of 30 years old. If you started courting a girl when she was 15 years old, then you can marry her at 18 after 3 years of courting, and then if you were married for 5 years before deciding to start trying to get her pregnant, then she would give birth at the age of 24, and that's a pretty good age for a woman to be having her first child. And hopefully by that time you're making enough money to support not just you and your wife, but a child as well. And if you live in a commune, maybe a commune started by another guy many years earlier, then this means the cost of living will probably be much lower. And if you use cloth diapers and do breastfeeding, then you won't have to buy disposable diapers or formula, and then you'll save a lot of money. And housing will be cheap in the commune, and you'll save money that way. You won't have to pay a bunch of money to rent, which is just basically the same as burning money up or just handing it over to someone for free. I mean, you're getting nothing out of it, It's literally slavery. Paying rent is slavery. But like I said, and then you'll be able to, because you're using cloth diapers and breastfeeding and living in a commune, you'll be able to afford to have a kid at a much younger age, and you'll be able to afford to have more kids than you would be able to if you lived in the outside world, outside the world outside the commune. With courting, you say from the very beginning that you're looking to eventually marry her. You tell her that you want to get to know her for a few years to see if you two would make a compatible pair. If you two would make a good marriage. You tell her that you're going to be serious about her and not date anyone else, but you're not going to have sex with her, and you tell her that you won't tolerate her dating or having sex with anybody else either, and you tell her that you will not sexually fool around with her because you don't want to ruin her, don't want to damage her. That is like if you both decide that you're not for each other, you're not going to get married after all, you don't want her to be damaged so that she's able to have a good relationship with the next guy who she does end up with, You tell her that you want to either marry her and then take her virginity and then, be married to her forever, or if the courting, forever meaning, all of your lifetime, until one of you dies. Or if the courting doesn't work out, then you have not harmed her. You've not done anything wrong. You have not ruined her. You have not damaged her prospects for marrying another guy. You tell her all this so she understands that she's tied up while being courted by you, and it's going someplace. You're looking to marry her eventually, so she knows she's waiting for a good reason. She's not just having her time wasted because you're looking to marry someone. That is, probably her, right? And if you two get along well enough and make a good pair, then you're going to marry her, right? And she knows this. And she knows that you're essentially her boyfriend, except that number one, it's headed toward marriage, and number two, you two are not going to sexually fool around until your wedding night, so she stays pure for either you on your wedding night, and or so that if it doesn't work out between you two, then she has stayed pure for the guy who does marry her. Even though she's not getting sex, she's going to be fine with waiting because she knows that there's something to wait for. She knows it's heading toward marriage. She's not going to cheat on you while you're courting her, and she's going to be fine with not having sex with you either because she knows that's the deal and that it's heading toward an end goal of marriage and then having sex and having kids. Grooming is for the purpose of getting sex without commitment and without legal punishment. Courting is for the purpose of getting to know each other so that you can get married if you both think you're the right person for each other. The goal and intent of grooming is to get sex. The goal and intent of courting is not to get sex. It's to get married and only then have sex with each other for the first time on your wedding night. And grooming is deceptive. Her parents don't know she's being groomed. Or he, in the case of, homosexual pedophiles or ephebophiles or whatever. Like the parents don't know that the young person is being groomed. But in courting, the parents do know that you're courting her. In grooming, even the victim often doesn't realize that they're being groomed. But in courting, the girl does know that she's being courted, and her parents do as well. In courting, everything is above board. Everybody knows what's going on. In grooming, everything is deceptive and covert. And courting is not selfish. The guy gets nothing out of courting, except for perhaps emotional support. And of course, a girl who stays pure for him so that when he's ready to marry, he can marry a girl who loves him and is pure and is someone who he knows he gets along with, right? Another difference, that's something else he gets, right? Like he gets a girl who stays pure for him so that, he eventually gets to marry a pure girl. That's what he gets out of it too. But he only gets that, commitment and sex and love and all that from, or at least sex and stuff. And he only gets that stuff after he marries her, after there's been a commitment and he's legally on the hook and stuff. Not that legally being on the hook is a good thing because the laws are misandric, but you know what I mean? Like there's the commitment, he's kind of on the hook, at least in, the community's eyes or whatever. Presumably there are no divorces allowed in the community or hardly any or whatever. So, he gets something, but it's nothing selfish and it's nothing that's going to really damage her, whereas, grooming, you are getting something out of the girl or the guy that is going to damage them. You're having sex with them. You're ruining their pair bonding ability. Not to mention sexually, sleeping with an underage person is going to not just damage their pair bonding ability, it's going to fuck their sexual development up. So that they're, like if you're like a 13-year-old guy like Ian Ling and some 18-year-old girl has sex with you, that fucks you up permanently. Now you're going to be promiscuous for the rest of your life. You're going to be attracted to older women for the rest of your life, etc. You know what I'm saying? It fucks up your sexual development too. So, grooming is destructive and courting is not destructive, right? Another difference between grooming and courting is that the guy who's courting a girl is going to probably also instruct her, in about all kinds of stuff. He's going to make her wiser. He's going to teach her things. Maybe even not just teach her knowledge, but teach her skills as well. He might teach her to play the guitar, or if he knows a foreign language, he might teach her the language that he speaks. He'll teach her as much as she wants to know. A guy who's courting a girl is going to try to make her wiser, both because he loves her and also because he wants her to be a more suitable spouse in the future when he marries her. And also because he likes teaching her things. It's fun. Just like it's fun to teach kids things. But in grooming, a guy does not make the grooming victim wiser. He wants the victim ignorant, not wise. He wants the victim powerless, not skilled and knowledgeable and powerful. He wants the victim to have low self-esteem, whereas, courting, you want your girl to have high self-esteem. Why wouldn't you, right? You don't want her to be, arrogant or overly confident or flirting with other guys, but you want her to have high self-esteem, And she will, right? Why wouldn't she? If you treat her well and, instruct her wisely and stuff, right? For example, a guy who's courting a girl might help her get into even better shape, right? Especially if she was a bit chubby before or something, she didn't exercise much, right? But a guy who's grooming a girl would probably not help her get in shape. He'd want her to stay fat so that her self-esteem stays low so that he can abuse her and she won't have the confidence to report him to anyone. A guy courting a girl doesn't help get his girl in good shape because she'll make a better sexual partner when they get married. He gets her in shape because he wants her to be healthy and confident, and physical attractiveness is part of it as well. But, he wants her energetic and confident and healthy. That's a big part of the reason, too. And until he marries her, he doesn't get the benefit from the increased sexual attractiveness of her more slim body once he gets her into shape. So it's still not really a selfish thing because he's not sleeping with her and won't until they get married, right? And if a groomer shapes the mind of his victim, it will be because he wants her to be an easier, more malleable victim. The things he tells her are not to make her wiser. But a guy who's courting a girl is trying to make her wiser when he teaches her things. To a feminist or to an ignorant outsider, it might seem to be the same thing because, the guy who's courting a girl might be teaching her to be submissive and obedient, but it's not the same thing at all because he won't benefit from that submissiveness and obedience much until they're married. She won't give him sex no matter how submissive and obedient she is because, they're both agreed that they're not going to do that until, their wedding night. And he's making her wait. And her submissiveness and obedience is a natural feminine quality. and a service that women offer to men in exchange for men's provision and protection and men's willingness to give her kids. He doesn't deserve sex and obedience from her until he's taken care of her. Now, he deserves her submissiveness in the sense that, like, she's not like a domineering bitch, and she's open-minded and she listens to him. He deserves like that kind of submissiveness and stuff, and like respect, but until they marry. But like until they're actually married, he doesn't deserve like blind, unswerving obedience from her about everything, because he's not her master yet. You know what I mean? And yet she should not be waiting until her wedding night to start to learn submissiveness and obedience. Like I said, she should have already learned it before she gets married. But, that doesn't mean that like he can just demand that she do things and she just does it, just because, he's not her master. You know what I mean? Like, because they're not married. Because that's what they, used to promise on their wedding vows. Like he would promise to, like, I think, love, honor, and cherish her, and she would promise to love, honor, and obey her husband. Right? The women didn't swear to obey their husbands before they were married. They swore to obey them on their wedding day, and then, from then on for the rest of their marriage. That was the vow or whatever. She should have already learned obedience and submissiveness before she gets married. She can kind of practice, while they're courting. She has no right to disobey him or deny him sex if they're married, and he's taking care of all of her material needs like food, shelter, clothing, medicine, etc. But, she doesn't really owe him anything until they're married, and he's providing her with those things. A guy courting a girl is not teaching her to be submissive to get her to have sex with him, because he's the one who is saying that they're not going to have sex until their wedding night. He's instead teaching her to be submissive to prepare her to be a good wife so that they can have a happy marriage, and thus, there's a good environment to raise kids in. Because you can't have a good environment to raise kids in if your wife is rebellious, if she doesn't obey you. You have to have a wife who obeys you so that you can have a happy, peaceful home and thus a good environment to raise kids in, right? And regarding, like, sex and stuff, like, he's the one who's saying that they're going to wait until the wedding night, not her, because presumably she likes him and stuff, right? So he could probably get her to have sex with him if you were not officially saying that this is just courting, not dating, and we're not going to have sex and stuff, but I'm looking to marry you, right? Like, if he just started dating her, he could get her to fall in love with him, and then he could get her to have sex with him, right? But that would be irresponsible and destructive, because if he's not committed to her, if they're not married, if he doesn't know he's going to stay with her, then what if they don't end up together? He's just ruined her pair bonding ability. You know what I mean? And women, like, will foolishly give in because they love the guy. They're not thinking about how this is not possibly going to be very destructive to me. She's not thinking, hey, maybe I shouldn't have sex because it could be very destructive to me later on. Now, like, decades ago, women used to think that, because they'd be like, I want to wait until my wedding night. I don't want to lose my pair bonding ability. Women used to think like that, when they were younger. So they stayed virgins until their wedding night, but they don't do that anymore because they're not taught properly, and culture is so corrupt and all the rest of it, right? So, guys have to be the ones to make women wait until their wedding night, But also, he can tie her up and prevent her from sleeping with other guys or dating other guys because he's courting her, you see. Parents who fight because of the woman not being submissive and obedient are not providing a good environment for kids. Parents who fight are in fact providing a terrible example and are pretty much guaranteeing that their kids are going to have dysfunctional relationships when their kids become adults because they grew up with the bad example of their parents always fighting. By teaching her submissiveness and obedience when you're courting her, you're training her to be a good wife and a good mother. And by teaching her things and making her wiser, that is also making her a better mother, because mothers, just like fathers, have to teach their kids important things about life so that their kids can understand the world and avoid dangers like premarital sex and fiat currency and STDs and lots of other dangerous things. And so that their kids can have successful lives due to being virtuous and wise, due to their fathers and mothers' wise, virtuous instruction. And teaching a girl who you're courting to be virtuous is going to be good for her too. It doesn't just mean that she'll be a better wife and mother, it also means that she herself will be happier. People who are content, frugal, hardworking, peaceful, loving, patient, etc. are happier people. People who are wasteful, vicious, lazy, impatient, entitled, etc. are more miserable people. If you're both virtuous, then your marriage, if both the husband and the wife are virtuous, then the marriage will go fairly well. If you're courting a girl, you're not teaching her to be more patient, generous, loving, etc., so that she can be a more absorbent sponge and soak up and tolerate more of your bad behavior. No, of course not. You're teaching her because women need moral instruction, and they can only get it from their father or their husband. They don't listen to moral instruction from their brother or their male friends. You teach her to be moral because you yourself are moral, and you want her to be on your level so that you two can get along and be happy together, and so that you can raise your kids to have the same moral standard that you both live by. The influence you're having on the girl you're courting is a positive one, and is not just for your good, but is for her benefit as well. But the influence that a groomer has on his victim is entirely different. It's selfishly motivated, and it's psychologically destructive and morally destructive. If you get a girl to be fit, that is, by exercising while you're courting her, then it's for the purpose of teaching her a lifelong habit of fitness, which will make her healthier and happier, as well as more physically attractive to you. And even the more attractiveness to you part is good, because if you're going to be married for probably, 50 years before one of you dies of old age, so it's a good thing if she stays as attractive as possible for as long as possible, because that, minimizes the chances of you cheating on her, right? There's nothing good about a wife letting herself go and getting fat and then having her man still have a physical need to have sex, but being unattracted to his wife because she's gained weight. He's like 40 and she's 40 and maybe she'd be okay looking, but she's, gotten fat. Or maybe they're only 30 or 35 or something, and she would otherwise still be attractive, but she's gotten fat now. When he married her, she wasn't fat. And so now, he's unattracted to her, and then, some girl at work is like hitting on him and stuff, and his secretary or whatever, and now he's having a hard time not cheating on his wife because she gained all this weight. You know what I mean? Like, not allowing yourself to gain weight is important to, like, not to keeping a marriage together. Not getting cheated on. So, guys should keep themselves in shape, and women should keep themselves in shape, although it's less important for guys to keep themselves in shape, because a guy's provision is what makes him attractive to her, that he's a good provider and she doesn't have to work and stuff. So if a guy's providing well still, a guy needs to preserve his ability to, provide for his wife and children with the same diligence that a woman needs to take care of her physical figure, because, by exercising, because that's what makes her attractive, and him being able to provide is what makes him attractive. So those two things are equivalent, Like I said, that situation of her having gotten fat can lead to him cheating on her, and that's not good for her. It's not good for him, and it's definitely not good for their kids, who, even if they don't know what happened, can still tell that something is wrong, because, their parents are all of a sudden fighting all the time because, one of them cheated because the wife got fat, right? So he cheated on her because, he's 40 and he still has a strong sex drive, and she's 35, and she's, she should be attractive still, but she's not because she got fat. And he's not attracted to her anymore, and, other women are hitting on him and stuff, and he still has a strong sex drive, but he's not attracted to her all the time, and he's not attracted to her at all anymore, even though he still has a strong sex drive, and she should still be attractive. But, like, if a woman gets unattractive from, older age, like, she hits the age of 50, and then she really loses her looks. I mean, women start to lose their looks at 35, but there's a lot of women who could still be somewhat attractive in their 40s. But, by the time they're in their 50s, pretty much all women have lost basically all their looks. And so, like, if she's, like, in her 50s, by that time, he's presumably the same age or older, so he's lost his sex drive by then. So if she loses her looks in her 50s naturally due to old age, it's not going to necessarily lead to him cheating on her. Probably won't. If she's, like, 53 and he's, like, 58, because women typically marry men older than them, he's already lost most or all of his sex drive if he's an average guy. So, it's not as much of a problem. She can postpone losing her looks longer. But if she loses her looks due to getting fat way earlier than she should, like, 30, 35, 28, whatever, I mean, even worse if she's younger, than that, that's unacceptable, because it's bad for the relationship, and it's, going to probably lead to him cheating on her, or ups the chances of him cheating on her. And that's not a good thing, So he's right to teach her to, stay in shape and stay attractive for him, because it's what's going to be good for their marriage, and it's going to be what's good for their kids, because it sure as hell is not good for the kids if one of them cheats, and then they're fighting all the time, because that harms the kids. And it harms their kids' marriages, too, because when their kids grow up, they think that, it's natural for parents to fight all the time, so then they fight with their spouse all the time, and then they get divorced, and then that's bad for their kids, and it just starts a terrible cycle, right? So, literally, like, staying in shape for your man is part of being a good mother, and part of not fucking up your kids and not fucking up your grandkids, Not that it's, like, entirely her fault if she gains weight and he cheats on her. He's obviously to blame, too, for cheating. But, like, she contributed and she shouldn't have. So it's a right and good and wise thing to teach your woman to, stay in shape. So yeah, there's nothing enduring good about a groomer getting his victim in shape, right? Like maybe a guy who's grooming a girl or a guy or whatever, like a guy grooming an underage person, like maybe he does the same thing and gets his victim in shape, encouraging them to exercise and stuff. But that would be for a totally different purpose, just for sexual purposes, right? It's not for the person's own good or anything, right? In fact, actually, women who are physically or sexually abused often put on weight as a sort of self-protection mechanism. If they have a physically abusive father or sexually abusive stepfather or something, a lot of them will get really fat as like a instinctive, intuitive self-protection mechanism to make themselves less attractive, so that they won't get beaten or sexually molested again. You know. So whether the groomer encourages her to get fit or not, she will probably gain weight after the groomer leaves her life, and then she'll probably put on a lot of weight and will keep that large amount of extra weight on for the rest of her whole life, thus making it so that she has lots more health problems throughout her life due to her obesity, and also making it so that she has a harder time finding a boyfriend or a husband, and thus a harder time having kids because of not having a man to give her kids and take care of kids. So really, courting is about getting to know someone, helping them become a more virtuous and more well-rounded and more knowledgeable and wiser person, and is about keeping the person pure and not ruining them in the meantime. Keeping them pure for whoever they end up with, even if that person ends up not being you. The courtship should be faithful but celibate, and it should be faithful and celibate, but it is not committed. It is not committed in the sense that at any time you could break off the courtship, or she could break off the courtship. Not that you're like dating other people during the courtship. It's more like you're courting, and then either of you can break it off at any time. But when you marry her, it goes from a faithful and celibate but uncommitted courtship to a faithful and non-celibate and committed relationship. Sex and commitment have to go together. Grooming is sexually oriented and deceitful. Courting is not sexually oriented and is not deceitful, but is totally above board. So really, courting and grooming are radically different, even though they may appear similar at first glance, and even though the media acts like courting and grooming are the same and never tries to draw a distinction between courting and grooming. Maybe it's just the fact that liberals want to destroy traditionalism and morality and want to instead promote statism and promiscuity and non-heterosexuality and other negative things. Or maybe it's just the liberals are so sexually oriented, so lustful, that they can't imagine a courtship actually being celibate, and therefore the liberals assume that all guys that court a girl are actually just trying to have sex with underage girls without getting in trouble. And there's no reason for the liberals to hate courting because her father has a say in whether the guy is even allowed to court her in the first place. If her father doesn't want her being courted by a particular guy, then she won't be able to be courted by that guy. It's not dating, so she won't be able to be courted by him. And courting also usually involves getting to know the family as well, so you're entering the girls' family lives in the way that you will when you marry her. You're getting to know her mom and her father, and you're spending time with her brothers, your sisters as well, and you're getting to know all of them. So you're basically doing the whole son-in-law thing and brother-in-law thing, and they're seeing how they like you. Whether you're nice or you're an asshole, whether you're smart or stupid, whether you're hardworking or lazy, etc. They're seeing how they like you. Just like the girl you're courting is assessing your moral character and personality compatibility with her, as well as your ability to be a good husband and father. And her parents and siblings are assessing you as well, just like you're assessing her parents and siblings as well. And you're learning more about her and her relationships with her siblings and parents as well, because that reveals her moral character and her moral defects as well. And is also part of what shows you whether you're going to be compatible with her or not in a marriage relationship, and thus whether you should marry her or not. Right? Like, you get to see her lose her temper. You get to see how respectful she is with her parents, how rebellious, how dishonest to please them, or whether she's honest but secretive, or whether she's honest and forthright and defiant if they tell her no, or whether she's honest and obedient and open. Honest and open but obedient if they tell her no about something. You get to see how she responds to her sisters. Like, is she really short-tempered with her sisters and like snaps and yells at her sisters, right? Because if so, then maybe she kind of has a temper, an anger problem, and maybe she would not make a good wife, You got to ask your sibling, because eventually, a person with a short temper is eventually going to turn their short temper on their spouse or boyfriend or girlfriend. You got to ask her siblings what they think what the biggest challenge would be in being her husband. And then they might tell you things like, well, she's got a really bad temper sometimes, or they'll say she can be a real spoiled brat sometimes, or they'll say she's not too bright sometimes, or whatever else, and then that will give you some insight on what being married to her will be like, and then you'll have to deal, and what you'll have to deal with when you're married to her, and what you'll have to try to modify in her, and whether it can even be modified. Some things cannot be completely changed, like basic personality, but other things can be changed by teaching her morality and backing it up with spanking. Right? Like a hot-tempered girl is always going to be hot-tempered, but if you keep her under control by making very clear moral rules for her and punishing her whenever she breaks those rules, then you can keep her tendency toward anger under control. You can keep it to a minimum so that she's not flying into a rage on a regular basis, but learns to control her anger as much as she is capable of controlling it. You'll still have to deal with her hot-temperedness, but it won't be nearly as bad as it would be if you did not discipline her and teach her morality and hold to those moral standards yourself in order to prove that you're not a hypocrite, as well as to give her a good example to follow. Right? Like, you can make people be their best self, but that doesn't change the, genetic limits of how much you can change them. But you can definitely use, strong moral standards and backing it up with spanking to make your wife the best version of herself that she can be. Right? But that doesn't change her basic personality. But there's a big difference between a hot-tempered girl who's, not being properly disciplined, and so she's just getting angry all the time and stuff, versus like a hot-tempered girl who is being disciplined and stuff, and so she only loses her temper every once in a while, or doesn't lose it nearly as bad when she does lose her temper, right? And if the girl's father doesn't like you and doesn't want you courting her, then you find another girl to court. Maybe you're both a bit sad about it, you and the girl, but since you have not had sex or anything, and since the courting has not been going on for long, or maybe it didn't even start yet, this means neither you nor the girl are very upset about her father forbidding you from courting his daughter. There's nothing creepy about courting because nothing is being done behind anyone's back. You see her mostly or entirely at her parents' house, so, it's basically supervised. Even if you're in her room with her alone, her parents could burst in at any minute, so it's not like you're going to do anything appropriate. Anything inappropriate, like have sex with her. Maybe you spend a good 2 to 4 evenings a week at her house, and maybe her parents forbid their daughter from going out with you. Like, from what I understand, that's often how it was back in the day, right? Like, and I say going out, I mean like, leaving the house. Like, if you want to court her, you have to do so at the house. Like many fathers would only let a guy court his daughter if the guy was willing to only see her at her parents' house when her parents were home to supervise, especially until they get to know him better. And under traditionalism, and it's also a way of preventing, their daughter from losing her virginity, right? Like, if all the dating or courting or whatever is done at her house, that's very different. She's not going to end up having sex with the guy. You know what I mean? And that keeps her, it preserves her reputation, it preserves her parents' reputation, it preserves her soul, it makes it so that she can have a happier marriage when she does marry someone, if she marries someone else other than you, right? So it's really important to only see the girl you're courting at her house. But unfortunately, parents now are the product of many generations of feminism, so even parents don't insist on this these days because they're idiots. So they let their daughter go out and date guys, and then she gets, fucked on the date. He fucks her in the back of the car or whatever, right? It's like, and then she's ruined for the next man, and, she probably doesn't end up with this guy, so she gets her heart ripped out and loses her pair bonding ability and all that, Like, fathers these days are fucking up huge by not acting according to the common sense guidelines the fathers of the past acted according to. Like how to court and stuff. Like, don't let your daughter see guys outside the house, It's fine if he wants to court her, if he wants to come over and, see her have dinner with the family a couple nights a week or something, or 3 or 4 nights a week, that's fine. But like, that's totally different than letting her go out on dates to where he's not supervising her anymore. And if you did go out on dates in the past, you usually had a chaperone so that, nothing happened. So the daughter didn't get ruined. That's how it was. Under traditionalism, girls are undamaged and parents have authority. And so girls are close with their parents and their siblings. And so since she's close to her parents and her siblings, this means that their opinion on the guy who's courting her is important to her because she loves her parents and siblings. So their opinion about the guy who she likes is important to her. So if her siblings warn her against the guy, then it might not even take her parents forbidding her from seeing the guy. If her parents aren't sure about the guy, but her siblings have strong objections to the guy and think he's a bad guy, then she may very well hone in on those weaknesses of character of the guy who, wants to date her or whatever, that her siblings point out. They point out his weaknesses, and then she might well break off the courtship if she sees what they're talking about and decides that he actually would not make a good husband or father, At least if she's close to her sisters and brothers. In a sane, hardworking, morally strict culture where parents raise both their sons and their daughters to be highly disciplined and highly moral, it is the case that women are completely physically and mentally, emotionally nubile at the age of 16. Nubile means marriageable. A girl is completely marriageable at the age of 16 if she was raised properly. Now, most girls are not raised properly, so they remain more immature at the age of 26 than a 16-year-old girl who is raised right. But if a girl is raised properly, then she is marriageable at 16. I'm not saying that she has to get married at 16, but that's the first year at which she is marriageable, in my opinion. She is definitely biologically marriageable at 16. She's totally sexually developed, totally able to have kids, and if she's mature from being raised properly by, parents that made her do a lot of chores, made her be patient, made her be chaste, made her be, loving and intelligent and submissive and all that. Like, if she was raised properly, the way women are raised, 100 years ago or 200 years ago, then yeah, she will totally be marriageable at 16 years old. So for the media to act like courting a 15 or 16-year-old girl is creepy, or marrying a 16-year-old girl is creepy, is just ridiculous. There's nothing unmarriageable about a 16-year-old girl who's raised properly. If girls were not fit for breeding at age 16, then why would they get their period and develop breasts years earlier? Women are completely marriageable at the age of 16, but they're completely marriageable at 26 as well. So whether you marry a girl at 16 or 26, there's nothing wrong with it as long as she's healthy and fit and has a good moral character and is sexually pristine, and she is not fooled around with any other guys. And you really should not fool, and when I say pristine, I mean like untouched, unruined. I don't mean like, she's really hot or something. And you really should not fool around with a girl at all if you're courting her because, even just fingering a girl or rubbing her clit can get her very attached to you and can ruin her, or at least partially ruin her for future guys. Ideally, one would even avoid kissing a girl while courting her. But of course, such a chaste type of courting would probably not last long because of how intense people's hormones are. But that's only if, you're alone with her. Like, the more you are around her family and you're never truly alone with her, then the less sexual activity you'll have with her, and thus the less ruined she will be, which is important in case she doesn't end up with you, if you don't end up marrying her, But just think about it. Why do they say, you may now kiss the bride? Why do they say that when people, get married? It's because most brides had their first kiss after the priest said, I now pronounce you man and wife. Most courtships are so chaste that there wasn't even any kissing. And so the more chaste a courtship is, the more special everything is when you finally do experience those things after you're married. And that means you'll be more bonded together, just like how the data shows that people who live together before getting married have a greater chance of divorce. Similarly, the less you fool around during your courtship, the less chance you will have of your marriage. The less you fool around during your courtship, the better the chance that your marriage will last. And if you don't even kiss, then if the courtship doesn't work out, then it means she can still have her first kiss be with another guy. And thus she's less ruined for that other guy because of never having kissed you while she was being courted by you. The more restrained people are in everything, the better. Not just in courtship, but in almost everything else in life. Restraint is like this magical quality that makes everything better. Not just in terms of enjoyment, but I mean in terms of you don't do destructive actions and so things turn out better. There's less destructiveness in life when people have more restraint, not just on an individual level, but on a society-wide level, etc. And women are emotionally mature at 16 if they were raised properly. Women are always immature throughout their whole lives, but not to the level that they are these days. I'll even say the women of the past were far more mature than the average American man is these days. A 16-year-old girl of 150 years ago, I would say, it was way more mature than the average American man these days, like a 25 or 30-year-old guy today in America. I would say such guys are typically less mature than a 16-year-old girl of 200 years ago or 150 years ago. Women of the past are actually really mature, though still more irrational than men were back then. Irrationality and immaturity are two totally different things. XXers are immature no matter how well they are raised, but immaturity is a relative term. XXers used to be more mature than today's men, in my opinion. And besides, just like with men, it's certain experiences which make them more mature. For women, it's having kids. It's, being raised to be hardworking and patient and kind and obedient, but it's also having kids which makes women more mature. For men, it's having kids as well, but it's also, getting a job, learning to be responsible in that job, taking responsibility for any subordinates he may have under him, and taking care of himself and being a responsible, upright, moral citizen. And then when he has become that kind of guy, he is more mature. And then when he gets married, he now has the burden of a wife on his shoulders, and thus he becomes even more mature. And then when he has a kid, he has even more burden on his shoulders, and that makes him even more mature. And women become more mature from having a child and having to take care of that child, as well as her learning to submit to her husband's will. This also makes a woman more mature, assuming he's a wise, benevolent type of guy, doesn't take advantage of the dominance that he has over her. But of course, with a lot of women, force is necessary. She's not going to learn on her own, probably. He has to spank her to teach her to submit to him. And when she learns to get comfortable with submitting and obeying, once he has forced her enough times, then she, it becomes the new norm, and then she just is submissive and obedient, and then everything goes better. And then she starts realizing that, she's way happier being submissive. She's way happier being, taking her husband's advice, etc. And that, being independent thinking and rebellious is actually not to her benefit. It makes her unhappier, it makes her do foolish things, etc. She starts to realize that actually she's way better off being submissive to her man, right? But she only realizes that after he forces her to submit, and she gets used to submitting. Women are not becoming mature these days because of the lack of male discipline. Men don't spank women anymore. Fathers don't even raise their daughters properly anymore, and that's also a huge problem. And men are not becoming mature these days because men do not have the freedom that they need to become mature, and there are consequently no consequences to behavior anymore, right? Because of there being no freedom. So men can't just explore and do things and then learn from the consequences. They just have to do nothing because of the fear of, government coming down on them like a wall of bricks, In the past, you could get in a fist fight and nothing would happen. You wouldn't go to jail. So if you were an asshole, someone might punch you in the mouth and nothing bad would happen to him. And nobody would attack him on your behalf because you were being an asshole. So then you'd quickly learn your lesson to not be an asshole. And so the freedom to do what you want and the freedom of other people to put you back in line when you do something that's over the line, that's something that's bad, that freedom forced men to learn maturity, because then men would step over the line and then other men would check them, and they could do the same thing to other men, so then everybody learns what is okay behavior and what is not. And then you naturally learn maturity from that. But when there's no freedom, that doesn't happen. All you learn is to be a little pussy who submits to the law and is a little bitch and submits to women and is really spiteful toward men and everybody's fighting this backbiting womanly kind of way. That's not maturity. You know what I mean? Enslavement to a tyrannical government does not teach anyone maturity. It teaches everybody to be a whiny, spiteful little pussy. And that's what men are these days, because we don't have any freedom. So everybody these days is a total pussy. If you offend a guy by holding up an offensive sign or do something, what's he going to do? He's going to call the cops on you. And if you get in an argument, he'll dare you to hit him so that he can call the cops on you. And then you'll dare him to hit you. And then it's just a stupid, pointless, bitchy little argument of daring each other to break the law so that you can, like a pussy, call the cops on the guy if he's stupid enough to break the law by throwing a punch or pushing you. So then it's just, throw a punch. No, you throw a punch. It's stupid. It's so ridiculous and just... It's retarded, childish behavior, but men are forced to act like children like this with each other, and thus are not able to learn their lesson. And this is all because of government tyranny. And that arises from, lack of character, lack of cohesiveness, lack of morality, that is, lack of ability to get along with other men, and thus lack of ability to join together with other men to overthrow the government, as well as the immature, cowardly, unvirtuous cowardice that makes it so that men don't want to risk their lives to overthrow the government. So because of men's, cowardice, they're enslaved, and because of the enslavement, they can't do anything, and thus they're forced to act like children, so then men are made immature. It is no surprise. It should not be anything surprising that we have this massively tyrannical government, and men are now acting like children. Men are acting like children and like women. Now, you may say, oh, this is partly the low testosterone and stuff, but I think it's just a natural, learned helplessness and learned bitchiness that, naturally arises when you're tyrannically enslaved, This is the child, they're mocking childish men in commercials and stuff these days. But I'm thinking, the childishness in men is only going to increase. It's just going to get worse and worse and worse because the tyranny is just getting worse and worse and worse. So until the tyranny lets the fuck up, either the government collapses or the government wakes the hell up and realizes tyranny is not the way to run a country and gives the people way more freedom, until that happens, men are not going to get more mature. Maturity is a natural response to having to deal with things. But you can't deal with anything when you have no freedom. So that's how it is. Men in the past could easily get a job in high school, and that would allow them to support themselves. They could get a job at 15 and make enough money to get an apartment and buy food and everything else they needed to live. Sometimes it was even enough to get a wife and maybe even support a child, although he'd usually, use his good work ethic and professionalism to get promoted, and then he'd be able to support a child. But everybody made way, way better money because of Xers being out of the workforce and there being little or no taxation. And so, even a much greater percentage of the male population could afford to support a wife and kids than is the case today. Not to mention there was no automation. Remember that scene from The Notebook? Remember he's like, at his girlfriend's parents' place, and they're rich or whatever, and they're talking to him, and they ask him like what kind of job he does, and he mentions that he works at this lumber yard or whatever, and then they're like, how much do you get paid doing that? He's like, oh, I make 13 cents an hour or whatever it was. And I mean, that sounds ridiculous, but money was worth way, 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 way more back then. So that was a decent amount. That was probably the equivalent of 10, 20 bucks an hour today. You know what I mean? And he's like, but I'm able to save most of it, he says. And that's how it was, right? Even the minimum wage type of jobs of back then, you were able to save a lot of money because the costs of, rent and things were so low, and there were way less people on Earth, which also makes the cost of rent lower because there's more land compared to everybody. There's not, the only way to create more land is to build down into the ground or up in the form of skyscrapers. That's the only way to create more land. Otherwise, there's just going to be less and less and less land as the population gets bigger, and therefore the cost of rent will go up, 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 up. But government tyranny in the 2008 crash and all the stuff they did to, prop up costs and stuff, and these big organizations and stuff buying huge amounts of, land and stuff, or houses or apartments or whatever. This has also massively upped the price of rent and stuff as well. But my point was that, he didn't get paid much, and yet he was still able to save a lot of money, right? So that's how it was back then, right? Now a guy can get a bachelor's degree and and he got that job, when I think he hadn't even finished high school, and he was working this job and he's able to save most of the money, right? Now a guy can get a bachelor's degree and get a job, and he still often won't make much money, and a lot of them won't even be able to save any money. Did you know that a lot of teachers, like first year teachers, I think even teachers have been teachers for a few years, maybe even teachers for the first 3 or 4 years, they have to be on food stamps and stuff, because that's how badly new teachers in public schools get paid. That is crazy, isn't it? That you get a degree and you get a decent job as a teacher, so obviously you're no idiot, and it's a job that requires a lot of hours of work as well, because you got to grade all those papers and do all that shit, right? Being a teacher is not an easy job, even if you're in public school, not to mention you got to deal with all the kids and their bad attitudes and the rebelliousness and all that, right? Cheating and how is it a sane society where you can work a job that's actually hard, like a teacher, a high school English teacher or math teacher or something? How can you do that and get paid so little that you have to be on food stamps? That is a fucking fact. I read about it in some article or something. That's crazy. That's how our society is these days. Back in the day, you could do this totally uneducated job, basically the equivalent of a minimum wage job, and you could actually live a decent standard of living, even if it was only you. You could probably, rent an apartment on it. You could save them extra. You'd have extra left over to save. You'd have even extra left over to do fun stuff every once in a while, every weekend or whatever. Now it's you can be working your ass off as a teacher and you're still on fucking food stamps. It's crazy. That is madness. That is absolute insanity. And that is how our society is these days. But it doesn't need to be that way. It didn't used to be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way, even now. Like I said, a guy can get a bachelor's degree or even a master's, and this is even a phenomenon. A lot of people with master's degrees work in really, really shit jobs, at Walmart or something. And I'm not talking manager. I'm talking checker or, greeter or something, or they're working in a bookstore, they're getting paid shit money, even though they have a master's degree. That is crazy, right? The price of rent is only going to get higher and higher the greater the world population becomes, and that makes it harder to become a man because there's no freedom, no ability to support yourself out of high school, without a college degree, or maybe I shouldn't say no ability, I should say very little ability, right? Little ability to travel, little or no ability to travel and survive on very little money like you could in the past. There's no freedom, no ability to be an explorer, etc. because of, tyrannical laws, and just there's 1.5 million laws, I mean, not literally, but like there's an insane number of laws, People are trapped and enslaved, and that's why men don't become men these days. And then women complain about there being no real men left these days. Well, it's become woman's best friend. Government is the well, it's become women's best friend, government, right? Like I think I meant to say it's become the case that women's best friend, that is government, is the thing that killed manhood. They got rid of all the real men. If women want real men back, they need to take men's side and turn against government. But women are too foolish to realize this, and so it's up to men to form communes or no-go zones, and then make those places as functional and virtuous and prosperous as humanly possible. And then when those areas are prosperous and luxurious and are becoming powerful, then women will want to join and will choose to give up all their rights so as to be allowed to join the no-go zone or commune. Infantilized men and women are not just a result of greater luxury, like iPods and tablets and Tinder and all the stuff that, technology brings, right? Like infantilized people are also a result of huge tyranny, like I said earlier. Infantilized people are just another form of learned helplessness. A dog that is shocked I read about some study or something, like they put dogs in, I think it worked like this. They put the dog in the cage, and then every once in a while they would shock the dog. Like the floor of the cage was like electrified or something. And then they turn it on and shock the dog, right? And the cage door was closed or whatever. And so the dog, no matter what he did, he would get shocked. And so then the dog would just learn to be helpless. He'd just lie down and just let himself be shocked. And then they could even open the cage door. And then the dog would not even try to escape because he's just learned that like nothing he does matters. And so he's not even going to try to escape. I don't know what the dog is thinking, whether he's assuming the cage door will be slammed in his face if he tries to escape, or if he's just so fallen into learned helplessness he doesn't even think about escaping. But if I remember correctly, they could even open the doors of the cage and the dog would not even try to escape, even though the floor is electrified and he's getting shocked every once in a while. This is a phenomenon, this learned helplessness thing. And this is what has affected, American men now, It's utterly horrifying. People will even give in to horrible, horrible, horrible things if they really feel they have zero choice and they have no freedom and no ability to fight back, or if they fight back, even worse things will happen to them. I mean, it's too much. America is just too evil for words. Really, really too evil for words. Like that, that really disgusting scene in that book, The Claiming of Sleeping Beauty. If you realize that book is written by a woman, though, then you realize that all those scenes are all written that way because that's how women are. Women like to be forced. They like to be forced to do things against their will. It turns them on. But the thing is, you can use that aspect of female nature for good, or you can use it for evil. You can teach her to get into really doing degenerate stuff or be very sadistic. Not even necessarily sexually sadistic, sadistic in other ways. You can get women into stealing or doing other bad things. You can get women to enjoy doing things that they did not used to enjoy doing before. You can force them to submit to your will and then do whatever you tell them, and then whatever you tell them to do, they will enjoy because they have no choice about doing it. And since they have no choice, they are free. They are free from being responsible for what they do. And being free, they are therefore free to enjoy those things that they're being forced to do. Whether that's, have sex with other guys, or torture other women, or kill people, or whatever the activity may be. But if you force her to be virtuous, then that will make her a better person. She'll see your superior wisdom when she starts to realize that, behaving virtuously makes her happier. She'll be a better mate, a better friend, etc. And then you forcing her to be virtuous will be a good thing. You can force women to be anything, and they will submit to it and enjoy it. But you should only use this power for good, not for evil. Evil usually backfires on the person doing the evil, and that's why it's called evil. If you force your wife to have sex with other men, she may very well get into it and enjoy it and love it, and it might even make your marriage better for a while. But over time, it will eventually create distance between you and her, and it'll ultimately likely lead to her cheating on you and leaving you. And the guy she'll be leaving you for will have the advantage of being able to tell her, "I'll never share you with anyone else." And that possessiveness will flatter her, and that'll turn her on, and she'll want to leave you in order to be with him, because he will seem like more of a man because of his refusal to share her with anyone else. Unlike you, who did get her to have sex with other guys. But back to the topic of marrying girls at 16. The media acts like it's scandalous for a girl to marry at 16, but if the guy can support her and a couple of kids, then what's the problem? Why shouldn't girls be having sex at the age when their body most wants them to be having sex and will therefore be enjoying sex the most? Why shouldn't wives be having kids when their bodies are the healthiest and therefore when their kids are likely to be the healthiest? And therefore probably the smartest as well. The media acts like girls marrying at 16 is scandalous, but it does not act like women getting wasted all the time is a scandal. The media does not act like women spreading STDs like crazy is scandalous. The media does not act like women being super promiscuous and callous and nihilistic and miserable is scandalous. The media does not act like women wasting their fertile years is scandalous, etc., etc. But those things should be considered scandalous. And marrying a 16-year-old should not be considered scandalous, especially if she was raised right and thus is more mature than the average 25-year-old guy or girl today. If a 16-year-old is as mature as a 25 or 30-year-old, why shouldn't she get married? You know what I mean? Plus, doesn't it just kind of prove that, in liberals' minds, marriage means nothing if they think that, marrying a 16-year-old is just, something bad, as if the guy's just marrying her so he can have sex with her for a few years and then divorce her? I mean, it's crazy to, look down on a 16-year-old marrying. Plus, 15 and 16 and 17-year-old girls are having sex these days anyway, so what's the difference between whether they're having sex with guys their own age who are not going to commit to them, or whether she's having sex with her husband who's 25 or 30 and he is committed to her and he does want to give her kids and he does want to be with her forever? How is it more abusive for a guy to marry a 16-year-old girl, and then have sex with her and all that than it is and want to have kids with her and everything and take care of her forever? How is that more scandalous and more abusive and usury than a 16-year-old getting banged by a 17-year-old who just wants to date her and then, he's not really thinking about whether the relationship is going to last or not? Just because the guy's 16, it makes it not abusive, even though he doesn't want to, he's not necessarily thinking of committing to the 16-year-old whose virginity he took, versus, how is that less abusive than, a 30-year-old marrying a 16-year-old and he does want to stay with her forever and give her kids and take care of her and treat her right and all that? You see what I mean? It's totally insane to act like marrying a 16-year-old is some kind of creepy thing. But that's what the media acts like, right? Well, if it's so creepy, then where's the payoff? He's not even sleeping with her. He's courting her when she's 14 to 17 or whatever, and then he's looking to marry her when she's 16, 17, or 18, right? If that's so creepy when he's courting her, then how is it creepy? Where's the payoff that's so creepy? He's not even sleeping with her. It's if it's so creepy and wrong and exploitative, then what's he getting out of it, and what is she losing? How is it harming him? I mean, how is it harming her, and how is it helping him? It's really not helping him, and it's really not harming her. So how is it creepy? The only thing that she's losing, from what I can tell when a guy courts her, is her chance to be a slore when she's young and too dumb to know how much it will destroy her soul to go around being promiscuous. By preventing her from being a slore, he's helping her. He's saving her from her own foolishness and from the wicked influence of this evil society that we live in. So he's actually preserving her purity and her soul and her happiness by courting her and not having sex with her. So, courting is actually the opposite of creepy. It's really virtuous and protective and good. He's not just marrying her for sex. People don't do that these days, at least not in America. In the past, people married to get sex, but that's just because there's no premarital sex. In the past, marriage was a very serious thing, and you could not get out of it unless the guy failed to provide for his wife and kids, or unless one of the spouses cheated, unless otherwise it was pretty much impossible to get a divorce. So even back then, guys did not marry just to get sex, because he had to be sure that she was good wife material, because if he did not make sure that she was wife material, then if he married her, he would end up bitterly regretting it because of having chosen her just for her beauty. If he married her just for sex, then he would choose her mainly on her beauty, right? And then he would end up regretting it because, she did not have sufficient moral character, right? He would not be able to divorce her, so he had to choose her on reasons other than sex, even though getting sex and love and having kids was the reason to marry back then. Now, men don't marry just to get sex. That's ridiculous. They don't marry to get sex anymore because we live in such a libidinous, promiscuous society. So why would a guy wait to have sex until marriage if he was exploiting the girl? The media's attitude toward courting and early marriage is utterly ridiculous. The media also acts like a guy wanting to marry young women is exploitative, as if, wanting to marry a virgin is a bad thing, right? And the media's attitude toward guys who marry 16-year-olds also implies that a girl cannot grow with her husband. Even if she's very naive and inexperienced and immature, as long as she's willing to learn how to be a good wife and learn how to obey her husband and submit to him, then she can grow she can grow with her husband, right? Like grow and change and evolve, right? She can change and grow as a person, and that can be something that bonds them together, right? Especially if he's growing and changing as well, as long as they're committed to each other. Like the hell or high water commitment, that was like what kept marriages together in the past. Not just the fact that the law did not allow divorce. Because people in the past, occasionally, when they really, really did not get along and they couldn't find a good reason for divorce, they'd separate. But it wasn't like an official separation. They just like went and started living in different cities, and they never really saw each other anymore. So it was like a divorce, but like it was not an official divorce. So people did occasionally do that back in the past, but for the most part, what kept marriage together was not the fact that you could not get a divorce. It was the fact that marriage was like really important, and nobody tolerated divorce, the separation for no good reason. And so, people were highly, highly committed to each other. They viewed marriage as like this hardcore commitment. And so they did absolutely everything they could to make it work. And even they would stay together. Like they had the attitude that like some years will be good and some years will be bad. So sometimes they could go for like through 3 years of like the marriage being bad, knowing that like, they stick together and they have moral character, and then eventually the marriage will get much better again. And then they'll have a few good years, and then maybe a few more bad years, and then a few more good years. They viewed it as kind of like cyclical and stuff like that. And so they just stay together no matter what. Even if the marriage is bad, they stay together. And that is what made marriage work on a society-wide level as well as on an individual level. Like I said, they would grow and change with each other as well because they're committed to each other, right? But as long as he loves her and treats her well, then even if he doesn't change, like if he's already set in his ways because he's 35 and she's 16, well, I think it could still be fine if she's changing, even though he's not, because if he's older than her by 10, maybe even 20 years, then it means that she still has stuff to learn from him and can still look up to him because he's older and presumably more mature, or at least more wise. Men these days, at least in America, do not marry to get sex and then divorce her. They don't marry a girl, have sex with her for a year or two, then divorce her, then marry another girl, have sex with her for a year or two, and then divorce her. They just don't do that, right? If you want to be promiscuous like that, guys just don't marry. They just date if they want to do that, right? There's no reason to do that in America at the present time, so guys don't do that. So there's no dishonest early payoff to courting. There's nothing exploitative about wanting to marry a girl and waiting until you're married to her before you start having sex with her. I think there's also a lot of dishonest conflation between grooming and courting. A conflation which is dishonest because it ignores the age difference. Grooming is usually something you apply to young children, often prepubescent, or maybe 13 or 14 at the oldest. So pedophiles groom, 3-year-old or 6-year-old or a 9-year-old or an 11-year-old girl or a boy. But people who will court will often court a girl who's, 14 to 17 years old or older, right? That's radically different. That's a whole different age range, right? I saw this recent episode of a Magicians episode where Margot says to Fenn that Christopher Plover had been grooming her. When they're all talking about something, he knows something that they need to know. And then he's talking and Fenn is really liking him, and she's talking to him, and she thinks he's charming and everything. And then he leaves, and then Margot says to Fenn, "He was just grooming you." And then Fenn's "Oh my god, but Fenn's in her I don't know, early mid-20s or something. So I'm what the hell? How is it grooming when an adult man is maybe flirting with or buttering up an attractive young woman who's clearly an adult? How is that grooming? If she's 22 to 25 years old, that's preposterous. You know what I'm saying? To call that grooming is insane. This is just more typical female twisting of words to make men look bad. When a woman admittedly, the Christopher Plover character was creepy. He's a pedophile. But why? If he's a pedophile, then why would he be grooming, quote unquote, grooming this girl who's way out of his age range? The age range of attraction for a pedophile is, people who are really young. Let's say 15 and younger, or technically that's ephebophilia or hebephilia if they're 13 to 15 or whatever. I can't remember if it's ephebophilia or hebephilia. I think it's ephebophilia, but it's only pedophilia if they're prepubescent, if they're 12 or 13 or younger, right? So if he's a pedophile, that means he's only attracted to people who are really young. Now, admittedly, one of the characters that he molested is maybe, I don't know, 14, 15, maybe 16, but I don't think even that old. I think the character is 13, 14, 15. But if that's so, and she's in, and he's described as a pedophile, then that means he's only attracted to young guys or girls. So why would he be flirting with this girl who's in her 20s? Pedophiles don't, groom or flirt with people in their 20s because they're not attracted to them. They're attracted to, they have a perverse attraction, meaning they're attracted to only to people who are younger, younger than is appropriate. So to call that grooming is ridiculous. This is just typical female twisting of words to make men look bad. Like when a woman commits a murder, a straight up, like premeditated murder at 8 or, somewhat premeditated at 18 or 19 or even 21 years old, they call her on the media, in the media and stuff, they say things like, oh, she's just a child or she's just a baby when she's 18, 19, 21. That's an adult. And she murdered someone, and yet they act like, oh, we should treat her with, mercy and not send her to jail or not give her the death penalty. She's just a baby. It's not her fault. He probably provoked her. But when a guy commits a murder at 13 or 14 years old, he is clearly a minor, and yet they are all screaming how we should try him as an adult and throw the book at him and all this. It's insane. This is how our society is. This is how gynocentric and insane the double standard is. Same thing here. Like if a creepy 27-year-old guy flirts with or butters up or tries to seduce a woman, then even if she's 23 years old, I mean, Christopher Plover was in his 40s or 50s, but like, for example, if like a 27-year-old guy who's either ugly or otherwise termed creepy, if he, flirts with or butters up or tries to seduce a woman, then even if she's 23 years old, they'll call him creepy and a pedophile and say he was grooming her if she didn't realize that he was buttering her up or trying to seduce her, right? But if a hot guy with money who's in his 30s flirts with like a 17-year-old or an 18-year-old, they'll act like he's amazing and that he's a great catch and that age is just a number and she should go after him, right? Like, there are no standards with women. It's insane. It's a total double standard. Like, depending on whether the guy's rich or not or whether he's hot or not. It's ridiculous. If they think that you're hot, then nothing you do is wrong. And if they think that you're ugly or lame or poor or whatever and you're undesirable, then nothing you do is right. And you're just creepy no matter what. That's where that's why there's that famous quote. I can't remember who said it, but it goes something like, when women love us, they forgive anything. And when they don't love us, they forgive nothing, not even our virtues. And that is really, really, really true. It's a famous phrase from a long time ago, hundreds of years ago. Maybe it was Voltaire or somebody like that who said it. But it's really true, And since it's top guys who like to bang tons of women and are not typically interested in virginity and have the money to be able to get a virgin who is 18 or older, even if virgins of 18 are very rare, then this means that the guys who are most likely to court a 14 to 17-year-old girl are regular guys these days. Because there are very few virgins who are still 18, especially very few virgins who are 18 who are attractive, physically attractive. And so the very few attractive virgins that are 18 that do exist, or 19 or 20, these women are instantly snatched up by rich men, right? So if you're a regular guy and you want to get a girl who's a virgin because you want your marriage to last, because you're sane and you want her to really love you, well then you're pretty much required to court a 14 to 7-year-old girl because you can't have sex with her because she's underage. Especially if you're like, 22, 23 or something, that's illegal. There's like an age range that like, you can date girls that are underage and it's not a crime. But if you're like 23, you can't even date a 17-year-old without it being a crime, And so you really are required to court a girl and not have sex with her because if you're sane, you want a virgin. If you have any common sense at all, you want your marriage to last, you want her to really love you, then you got to date a virgin, but you can't have sex with her because she's underage and you can't find a girl who's above the age of consent who's a virgin unless she's ugly, and you don't want to date an ugly girl, so you're pretty much required to court a girl who's 14 to 17 years old, so you can get a virgin who's actually attractive, and that's it, and you can't have sex with her because of the law. This means that the guys who are, like I was saying, the guys who are most likely to court a 14 to 17-year-old girl are regular guys, not the 10 out of 10 old MGTOW Yan Ling type of guys. And since these are just regular guys, the guys who are courting these 14 to 17-year-old girls, they are lacking in extreme attractiveness and are thus considered to be creepy, even if they're just a normal 5 or 6 out of 10 guy, right? And thus the media puts out the idea that guys courting girls who are 16 or marrying girls who are 16 is creepy, because women feel like it's creepy because it's regular guys doing that. And they hate beta sexuality. They think it's the creepiest thing ever, whereas they love alpha sexuality, no matter how predatory and psychotic and destructive it is. This is really, really how it is. I mean, to act otherwise is to just let society be annihilated, and we're acting otherwise, and that is why society is being annihilated, because we're not accepting this truth. You know, women cannot set fair, rational standards. They complain about double standards against women, but really, men are the ones who set fair standards. Sometimes those standards are different for men and women, but that's only because men and women are different, not because men are some patriarchal, oppressive assholes. But women are the ones who really institute massive double standards that are just totally insane. And men are letting them get away with that these days, which is totally insane itself. You know, to let insanity happen and affect you without fighting it is insane. You know, and that's what men are doing these days. Like I said, women feel it's creepy for guys to, court or marry, underage girls or whatever because it's regular guys doing that. Because, the top guys don't have to, do it with an underage girl. They don't have to court or marry an underage girl because they can attract those very few above age, 18 or older, virgins who are actually physically attractive. But regular guys can't get those rare women, and so they have to, court underage girls. But women are not attracted to regular guys typically, and so, they call it creepy, right? Women want to make sexuality of the bottom 80% of guys literally illegal. They want to make the bottom 80% of guys' sexuality literally illegal. That is what we're heading toward. And women want to, and this is not an original insight, that is basically what, one of the guys on 4chan said, I think, and then the guy, Black Pill Presentation, showed a screenshot of it in his video called Mechanized Hypergamy, and it's really true. It really is true. They would literally like it to be illegal for bottom 80% guys to have sex with women. They would love to force the bottom 80% of guys into celibacy or homosexuality and have all the women be only able to have sex with the top guys. That is what women would like, and that is what we are heading toward. Women want to allow the sexuality of the top 20% of guys to remain something the women can choose to pardon, even if it means pardoning such a guy for raping her, because he's hot and he has money. As long as he gives her child support or dates her or marries her, then she's okay with him having raped her. Women are attracted to alpha sexuality, even if these guys are psychopathic rapists. And women are utterly repelled by so-called beta sexuality, even if those guys are totally respectful, honorable, good-looking. They have inner strength, and they're wise, and they're decent looking, maybe not gorgeous, but those guys are decent looking, and maybe they're even above average intelligence, and maybe even above average in every way. Maybe they're like a 7 out of 10, but a 7 out of 10 isn't even close to being in the top 20%. Even 8 out of 10 guys are not in the top 20%. Imagine that. 8 out of 10 guys are not in the top 20% that women want. Women consider guys who are 8 out of 10 to be below average, because only 9 and 10 out of 10 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10 guys are the top 20%. You see? So, unless you want to consider that, I guess there's less 10 out of 10 guys and less 9 out of 10 guys than there are 8 out of 10 guys. So I guess maybe it would be 8 out of 10s that are included in the top 20%. Because there's not an equal percentage of, 1 out of 10s, 5 out of 10s, and 10 out of 10s. So I guess 7 and 8 out of 10s and maybe 7 out of 10 guys are also, I guess, included in the top 20%, now that I think about it. But still, guys who can be above average can still be considered to be betas and thus below average and thus unattractive. Even if these so-called beta guys are not pussies at all, but are quite masculine, strong, intelligent, etc., women often still view them as, undesirable, which is crazy, Oh, and by the way, just a little side note, isn't it interesting that Lev Grossman, author of The Magicians, which the TV show is based on, which, had that scene in it that I talked about, Lev Grossman, Jewish, by the way, wrote the C.S. Lewis character in his book, which was partly but heavily based on the Narnia books. Isn't it interesting that he wrote the Christopher Plover character, who was he sort of based that character on C.S. Lewis, in a sense. Not necessarily in terms of personality, but the book The Magicians is about these people who find this, magical university that teaches them to do magic and stuff, right? But they originally learned about it from these series of books, and these books are thinly disguised Narnia ripoffs. And the guy who wrote them in the book The Magicians, was a real world author, and his name was Christopher Plover. Not real world in our real world, but the real world of the book The Magicians, right? So they discover his books, they read them, they really like them and stuff, and then they later on learn that magic is real. And Christopher Plover had a connection to this other magical world where there's even more magic than in our world, right? So anyway, the Christopher Plover character is supposed to be C.S. Lewis, basically, right? Who was the real writer in our world of the Narnia books, right? And so Lev Grossman makes the Plover character a pedophile. Isn't it interesting that he made the C.S. Lewis character considering C.S. Lewis is a Christian and considering Lev Grossman is a member of the Wandering Tribe, isn't it interesting that he made the C.S. Lewis character a pedophile? You know, and surprise, surprise, Lev Grossman also wrote the main character, or one of the main characters at least, Quentin Coldwater, as a bisexual, or at least as a bi-curious person. You know, yet another example of, you know, a member of the Wandering Tribe, you know, being in favor of homosexuality or being open to it or not caring about it or whatever. Like, why am I not surprised that a member of the Wandering Tribe would write about a bisexual male character? You know, but it's just so offensive that he wrote the C.S. Lewis character as a pedophile, because C.S. Lewis is such an ardent Christian, and the Narnia books were such a Christian allegory, you know? What's his name? J.R.R. Tolkien was a hardcore Christian too, and he was friends with C.S. Lewis, but he did not believe that you had to do, you know, your books as Christian allegories. So those books, you know, the Hobbit and the Fellowship of the Ring, the Two Towers, and the Return of the King, those books are not Christian allegory. So, yeah, I think it's quite offensive to write the C.S. Lewis character as a pedophile. It's just such an insult to C.S. Lewis specifically and to Christians in general. You know, and considering Lev Grossman ripped off a lot of C.S. Lewis's Narnia books for his book, The Magicians, you would think that, like, you know, he'd be grateful to C.S. Lewis because he ripped him off. But no, he doesn't even have enough gratitude and respect for C.S. Lewis, to at least be honorable enough to not slander him by basically calling him a pedophile, by calling making Christopher Plover in the book a pedophile. I mean, it's not like we're talking about Lewis Carroll here, the writer of Alice in Wonderland, who was rumored to have been a pedophile, although I think a celibate one. We're talking about C.S. Lewis, who, you know, I've never heard anyone talk anything bad about. You know, they're two totally different people, C.S. Lewis and Lewis Carroll. You know, now maybe Grossman did it because he thought it'd be clever, because both of them having the name Lewis and their other names starting with a C, but, you know, still, you'd think he'd be more respectful, considering how shamelessly he ripped off C.S. Lewis's Narnia books, in particular the two Narnia books called The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe and The Magician's Nephew. But regarding the age overlap between grooming and courting, I don't think there's much overlap. And even if there is, there's all those other differences. The fact that, you know, grooming is covert and hidden, whereas courting is open, known, and above board. Grooming is deceitful, courting is honest, grooming is done without parental approval, courting is only done with parental approval, grooming is for the purpose of getting sex, whereas courting is for the purpose of getting to know each other and see if each person would make a good spouse for each other, and is not sexual, and the sex only happens after they're married. You know, grooming is destructive, and courting is healthy and salubrious. I think that's about all I had to say on this topic. The script was only like 50 minutes long, but I guess I did a lot of, you know, saying other things that weren't exactly in the script, so it made it longer, you know, unfortunately. I don't like making videos that are this long, but, you know, I guess it couldn't, you know, it couldn't be helped, and I guess I don't want to redo it again because it's such a long video. I don't want to re-record it, so, you know, thankfully, you know, Old Man Flappy Nuts watches my videos on 1.5 speed, so, you know, it won't take him this long. It'll probably only take him like 45 minutes or less to watch this video. But, you know, hopefully he liked it, and hopefully he got something out of it, and hopefully some of my viewers got something out of it as well. Peace.